Um, Good morning, everybody, and thank you for logging on to today's webinar about IHCDA's administration of the HOPWA program this year. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Nilufar Asgari, knee like your knee, Lou like Lewis, far like the kingdom of far, far away. And yes, that is how we pronounce my name. My pronouns are she and her. And I am the grants analyst at IHCDA that focuses on HOPWA. For those of you who are familiar with what happened with the Institute, whether you attended virtually or in person, there's been a wealth of knowledge that I'm sure all of us have gained through the HOPWA Institute from the HUD, both HUD itself and also their technical assistance providers. And we're all thinking about all the updates that could be made to better serve our communities and make sure that the clients that need our HOPWA funding and HOPWA services are able to access them. One thing I will say that I said last year, I'll say it this year. This webinar has a lot of material to cover. Some of that material is new. Some of it is just general reminders that we share every year. Regardless of that, though, I anticipate that there will be questions that come up throughout, so you are more than welcome to type them in the chat. You're also welcome to raise your hand or shout them out accordingly. And we hope that this webinar will be as informative for you as it can be, especially with administering the awards that you've all been awarded. So to get a better understanding of the way that our webinar will be structured, we will start by sharing team updates. So we have both our HMIS team manager and our COC engagement team manager on the call today to speak about the updates that they have and how that better connects to your work as project sponsors. With the HOPWA program, I'll also be conveying updates from the compliance team to make sure that the updates that they have are all given to you. I'll then transition to reminding you about the goals that we have for the program and the components to which you may be able to spend your funding, also known as the eligible expenses term that I'm sure you've heard in past webinars or in past discussions. I'll summarize what our current status is for fiscal year 2024 awards, and then we'll start talking about claims, both the submission guidelines and just general reminders that come up. One thing I'll like to note with that is that this is not a specific training on claims. More so, this is a general reminder about things that are relevant for your agencies as you're claiming. We will have a claims training video that we plan to release at the end of the year that will go more in depth on that, though. So stay tuned. We'll also talk about requirements and policies. Most of these requirements that have always been with the HOPWA program. So ranging from the financial management training that all the agencies have to do, all the way to program income and award closeout. The award closeout requirement does overlap with your CAPER, and in many ways is a part of your CAPER and is your CAPER, but we're still going to intentionally talk about it as a closeout for the reasons that HUD has structured its CAPER the way that it has. And then we'll also take questions at the end in case there aren't any additional questions for the webinar. One thing I'll especially note for your reassurance is that this webinar recording and the slides will be made available on our HOPWA webpage. So once this is over, I will send the slides, the PDF of the slides and the recording over to our communications team and send a follow-up email letting you know when that has been posted. So without further ado, I'd like to kick it off to our HMIS team, Brendan Devitt.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you, Neelafar, for this opportunity. So I'm sure as all of you are acutely aware, HMIS data entry is required as part of the HOPWA program through IHCDA. We do have a HMIS website, which is linked here. There's a lot of information and resources as far as doing intakes, discharges. There's a link to the HOPWA specific program manual that HUD puts out. And then also linking here is the email addresses for the HMIS help desk. So if you ever have any questions or concerns related to HMIS, this is the best way to reach out to us and contact us. And then in an update that I'm excited about, and I'm sure some of you will be as well, the HOPWA APR is now available in Client Track. So I know it's a little late for this year's, but going into next year's grant period, we will have the HOPWA able to be pulled directly out of Client Track. So hopefully that should really help with your reporting season. And with that, this is a report that is created by Client Track themselves. So they've done some testing of it. The IHCDA team has not yet had time to do testing or produce kind of training materials on it, but anticipate seeing that sort of thing from us as we get closer to that time of the year. And I would encourage people to go in and maybe try give it a test run, see how it looks, see if it's capturing your data accurately, see if there's any stuff in there that's useful kind of on a day-to-day or maybe month-to-month basis, but you could start tracking some of your data quality things throughout the year. So it'll make reporting season easier. But that's all I've got. So thank you very much.
And yes, thank you again, Brendan, for your discussion on that. Next, I'll kick it over to Jesse Van Hooser.
Hi. I want to just start by saying I know Brendan and I actually will be jumping off to another meeting after this. So if you have questions for either Brendan or myself, we'll kind of take those a little earlier if that's all right, Neelufar, since we're not going to be able to stay the whole time. And then Neelufar can always forward any other questions if you think of them later. We're totally fine answering those. I am going to talk about the new CE assessment process, CHAT, the Collaborative Housing Assessment Tool. As everybody knows, I hope the VI SPDAT, the tool we used to use, not that great. It is now defunct. We are no longer using the VI SPDAT here in Indiana as of a week ago today. We are using the chat, which is a tool designed here in Indiana by a group ranging from geographic diversity, agency type, subject matter experts, etc. This particular process had a couple reasons behind it. The biggest thing is we needed the alternative for the VI SPDAT. We didn't want just an assessment. We wanted a full cohesive process. We didn't want something that just gave us a number. Turning humans into numbers has never been great. We wanted something that was a little more holistic. We wanted equitable outcomes, trauma-informed language, person-centered focus, data-driven evaluation. And because it's our tool, our process, we created it, we can adapt it, we can update it, we can tweak it, change it, add new things, remove things that are not working. We wanted to move away from classic one-size-fits-all, something that is community-driven, reflects the local needs. We wanted local data, local input, and to accurately depict Hoosier lives and Hoosier voices. And lastly, across the COC, all 91 counties in Indiana outside of Marion County, we had these things being done quite differently. So this gave us an opportunity to kind of standardize it. So hopefully, if a project sponsor is down in the South, they're going to have the same interaction with their coordinated entry process as somebody in the North. Next slide. Broadly speaking, the new assessment process is a phased process. There are 6 phases and a conversational next steps phase. The phases cover things listed here. So intro and key points and participant consent. There's an urgent needs and lethality assessment as appropriate, which provides an intentional space for a pause in case somebody's experiencing a current emergency or a current crisis, needs to be connected with victim service providers or another agency to resolve a crisis. We can always pause the assessment and continue forward. There's a robust information for contact collection, because we're not just going with what's your phone number. We talk about what agencies do you visit? Where could you go? Is there somebody that we could leave a message with that you check in with regularly? We're trying to make this more of a conversational approach, because how to get a hold of somebody is so different from person to person. We have a housing problem solving conversation. People might be familiar with the term diversion. Housing problem solving is a more holistic view of diversion. It is a way to look at it as not just where will you sleep tonight, but what are your household's strengths? What are your household's experiences? How can this be tied together to potentially lead to self-resolution? And it will only work for a small portion of the people, but we're having that conversation with every client that comes in for coordinated entry assessments across the state. Housing needs assessment is the only scored assessment. That's where we get the prioritization score through this process. Housing preferences allows clients to have some input in, is there a side of the town that they would like to stay on? Is there a city they cannot stay in? Is there a need for first floor, higher up? Is there a need for large apartment building versus a scattered site? What are their preferences and needs? Can't always accommodate every single preference, but it allows us to have an understanding of what would work best for the client. Because if they're excited about their housing, if it meets the needs, if it feels appropriate to them and comfortable to them, it's probably going to work better. Lastly, there's a conversation piece about, how can the client move forward while this process is going? What's the expectation? What's the system look like? Because we want them to understand that this is not an emergency, like magic answer to housing. There is more need for housing than housing opportunities in Indiana. And we want to be realistic about that. So setting proper expectations. Next slide. This is the last one for mine, I believe, but this is just broadly to talk about how these pieces interact with the referral process. So first, when a regional CE lead is making a referral for housing, they will check special population programs and guidelines. So they'll look at veteran status, or if it's an FYI voucher, they'll look at the youth status, or DV history, or a disabling condition, or chronic homeless status. All of these things can factor in. Housing needs assessment is scored, and that's the one that provides that prioritization score. So there's the length of time homeless, chronic status, all of that factors into who is referred to any particular housing opportunity. There are regionally determined tiebreakers. If everything listed above in the prioritization section is equal, those regions are able to determine what is the next tiebreaker, and that gives the regions a little bit of control based on the populations that they experience in their area. And there's a big focus on case conferencing. Historically, the number was the end-all be-all with the VI SPDAT system, and we're focusing more on case conferencing. After somebody's prioritization score recommends or indicates that they should potentially be set up for permanent supportive housing, then the case conferencing really identifies, like, does this person need rapid rehousing? Do they need permanent supportive housing, or would they thrive and succeed and move towards self-sufficiency in rapid rehousing in a lighter touch program? Trying to find the right fit for the client, not just mapping it to a number. All of those things being said, um, there's one piece related to HOPWA programs specifically that is still something that we're sorting out. Given that this is a new process, and like I said, we've been using it for a week for prioritization, the VI SPDAT as a system had a single question that was if there were housing made available to individuals who were HIV positive or diagnosed with who had that diagnosis, would that be of interest to you? Because HMIS is not a medical record, because there are privacy laws and concerns, there is no direct question of somebody's medical status. So prioritization for programs that require those things becomes a little murky, a little complicated. So we're looking at finding the best ways to pair coordinated entry with HOPWA programs. And in practice, what's being done across the state is more of an informal referral. If a client is on the coordinated entry list and identifies or indicates to any assessor, any access site that they do have those concerns or have that need, they can be paired to the local resources instead of having it be a formal referral. We'll still work to find out the best footing from there. We want to ideally make it as easy as possible for you guys to access CE, to refer to CE, and get referrals from CE as needed. The last bit that I would like to say is one super tiny piece. The CE process across the state has created a new document, a CE Access Site Agreement. If there is any interest at any of your agencies to become a CE Access Site and gain the ability to do coordinated entry assessments, reach out to your local regional CE lead. And I should have recommended we put this in the slide, but for anybody who doesn't know, I'll put the regional structure link in the chat, but you can find the regional CE lead agencies. They're broken down by the region. There are 16 regions across the state. You can find the email address for the CE leads if you have any CE questions. My information is also in this PowerPoint, so you can always reach out to me with questions and I will connect you. If I don't know the answer, I'll connect you where you need it. If I have the answer, I'll give it to you directly. Nilafar, is there anything that you'd like me to cover that I have not covered at this time?
Yes, thank you, Jesse, first of all. So I would like to I would have to at least make sure that we are all understanding that while HUD doesn't specifically require HOPWA to exclusively accept CE or absolutely accept CE in the same way that COC and ESG do, we also don't want to discourage any acceptance of referrals that may come from CE.
Correct. Right now, given that HIV status is not something indicated at all during the assessment process, it would be rare for a CE referral to be made to a HOPWA program, but historically it has happened, and it is something that can happen. It is appropriate to happen if somebody meets the eligibility criteria. If you ever find that you are getting referrals in an inappropriate way, you're getting referrals who don't meet eligibility criteria, you're getting referrals for people who should not be referred to your program, that's a case-by-case problem that we can definitely solve as well. Yeah. Anything else
Right.
for me, Nilufar?
No, I don't have anything else for you.
All right.
Thank
Thanks
you
so
so
much.
much.
And the regional structure link is in the chat. As I said, reach out with any questions. Thank you all for your time. Nilufar, back to you.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your day, Jesse.
You as well.
All right, so now we're going to transition over to updates from our compliance team. So just for your FYI, our compliance team is monitoring HOPWA awards within the next 1 or 2 months, give or take. If you have not been notified already, the compliance team will notify you via email if your award will be selected for monitoring. In that time, they may ask for additional documentation or for your time to directly be on a call and answer questions that may pop up. So once that monitoring process has started, and once, of course, you reach the end of that process, each project sponsor that has been monitored will receive a report that details concerns or findings. Of course, once that report is given and the concerns or findings are outlined, the project sponsor agency is then responsible for addressing those. As a reminder from last year and from past years, I'll say this again this year, if you don't resolve findings or concerns in a timely manner, you may be unable to submit claims. So please make sure that you are working with the compliance team to answer questions, provide documentation, and to resolve anything that arises as a result of that compliance monitoring. With that, I will transition to the next part of our webinar, which is more specific to why we are here, right? And when I say here, I don't mean specifically this webinar. I mean more with what we as a state, as project sponsors or the grantee, like what is our goal for HOPWA? First and foremost, at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we're funding housing and health resources to support those living with HIV and their loved ones. This is who is going to be the people that are impacted by the funding that we have, right? So we want to make sure that we are being good stewards of that funding and making sure that our communities across the state are able to access what they need. With that, we also want to set you up for success. So we want to make sure that you, the project sponsor, can spend your HOPWA funding all down to zero. And we're working on ways to optimize that given what we've all learned from the HOPWA Institute. So I encourage you to stay in the loop and check your emails as they come up in the next year or so, because that is a major priority of ours to help get our program into a better and more optimistic track. In addition to that, we do want to, at the end of the day, make sure that we're maintaining compliance with HUD regulations on the spending and program operations and development. So it's one thing to have eligible expenses listed in the regulation. It's another to comply with regulations and guidance and notices that come up, as well as looking at all of the requirements that we have to abide by in order to make sure that the rights and the information of our HOPWA clients are protected. So now this is where we're going to go into more of the discussion of information that you may already know if you are the person that submits claims or looks at budgets. So we're going to start with a conversation about what you can use your funding for. First off, it goes without saying, if you have tenant-based rental assistance, you can use that for ongoing rent and utility payments that you make monthly to your clients. The TBRA line item that you may see in your budgets and on IHCDA online is specifically client-centric. However, there is another line item for staff time, and that is called the long-term program delivery line item. So if you're spending time working on the administration of your TBRA for all the clients in your program, that is where you would claim those expenses. So just keep in mind that with TBRA, like, you are able to support the rent and utility needs of your eligible clients. Keep in mind, and this is clarification that we have received from HUD, that HUD does not impose a term limit on the TBRA assistance that a client can receive. So as a result of that, we have opted to not impose one as well as the grantee. If a project sponsor, for whatever reason, does find that they need a term limit for their TBRA program, we ask that you take special steps to ensure that, one, there's no duplication of benefits that occurs while the assistance is being administered, which, if you're wondering what duplication of benefits is, that's just referring to the idea of a client getting both HOPWA funding and another funding source from HUD as well. Additionally, we want to make sure that the HOPWA services are administered without discrimination against members of protected classes as defined by state, federal, and local laws. And we want to make sure that you're all continuing to follow regulations on ensuring confidentiality for all clients, personal and health status information, and that termination of assistance, TBRA and otherwise, is only done as a last resort. So again, while HUD does not have a term limit for the amount of time a client household may receive TBRA, and while we as the grantee are also not going to give a term limit, we do understand that there may be cases where, for whatever reason, we don't anticipate this, and maybe a project sponsor may notice that they may need to. So as long as those 4 factors are taken care of, that is fine. With that said, if there is additional guidance from HUD on term limits that a household can receive assistance in, we will communicate those updates accordingly, so then you have time to update your policies. This is just a reminder of what you cannot spend TBRA funding on. When it comes to security deposits, please note that this is a expense that is eligible under permanent housing placement, which helps get your clients moved into a new unit. Mortgage expenses are really more of a STRMU expense really than a TBRA expense, because TBRA is specific to rent and rental assistance. Expenses due to repairs or damage, depending on the extent of those repairs or damage, if it keeps the client housed, you may be able to get that fixed under permanent housing placement. However, if you have questions about this, please let us know. Finally, when it comes to rent for a unit owned by a client's relative, this is more so to prevent conflict of interest that may pop up. And then let me see. We did receive a question in the chat. Does the term limit removal for TBRA start immediately, or do you have an implementation date? That's a good question. So at this time, we encourage you to because our guidance is more so based on what HUD has given us, we don't necessarily have a guidance, because we understand that it is case by case basis. So if you are wanting to remove your term limits for clients, you are more than welcome to do that immediately. If you are really insisting on a term limit, I think that is a larger conversation that we may need to have with any project sponsor that wants to pursue that, just to make sure that all the things are protected and that clients are still able to access services that they need. I hope that answers your question, given the way that we've structured our guidance. And of course, if there's additional guidance, let me know, or any questions, please let me know. I'll work with that. Let me see. Okay, next is STRMU. So when you have someone that is a client or a client household that is already in a unit, this is going to be the line item for that household. So this is a preventative program. It's very similar to COC and ESG in the sense that if you have like a homelessness prevention line item or funding bucket, this has similar enough outcomes for it to sort of coincide, but not really. One thing I'd like to note is that the differences with COC and ESG is that, of course, as mentioned on the slides, they get up to 21 weeks of assistance in a 52-week period. However, this program allows you to pay for mortgage, rent, and utility assistance. The STRMU line item that you may see in your award budget or on IHCDA online is specific to the assistance that is administered specifically to the client or a client household. However, if you are spending time on the work that it takes to administer the STRMU assistance, we have a line item called short-term program delivery. So even though this is not the funding that you want to use that to help the client, this is the funding that you're using to, again, pay for the work that you're doing to help the client. We have included a comparison table that has been made by HUD, and it's available in the HUD Exchange, where you can see the differences between STRMU and TBRA. When you receive this PDF of the slides, you'll also have access to the link of that handout, where it provides more information than what you see here. But generally, if you're looking for more of a visual understanding of how TBRA and STRMU are similar and different, this would be the source for you. Additionally, HOPWA allows you to claim time for supportive services. So really, this refers to the time spent by a staff member to improve a client's access to care and services. This is more so of that intersection between housing assistance through TBRA and STRMU, and of course that service-oriented line item that allows you to bridge that gap between what the clients may need that is not housing specific and more health specific, and what is, of course, related to housing. So on the slide, we've outlined all of the specific items that have been listed in the regulation directly. So health and mental health services, specifically the time that you spend assessing needs, the cost of drug and alcohol abuse treatment and counseling, cost of daycare, personal assistance, nutritional services, intensive care when required for the client who is living with HIV. Of course, there's also the assistance in accessing local, state, and federal government benefits and services. So we did receive a question in the chat. Can you give an example of personal assistance? The regulation is written very broadly on this, so there are some questions that are very case-by-case basis, according to client need, according to just the general nature of how the housing landscape changes over time. If I had to give an example of personal assistance, I would equate that to maybe assisting them with getting somewhere from point A to point B. So I would interpret that as maybe transportation assistance, because that's what's helping them get to the drug and alcohol abuse treatment and counseling, or helping them get to that daycare, or helping them get to the health or mental health services. However, that's more of an initial answer. When it comes to a specific answer that HUD would look at, I would need more time to get that for you. And I will send that out in a follow-up email as well, so that you're all prepared to administer any personal assistance as HUD interprets it accordingly. One thing I want to make a note of with supportive services is that the regulation specifically states verbatim that health services may only be provided to individuals with acquired immunodeficiency syndrome or related diseases, and not to family members of these individuals. So that's why there's an asterisk on the health and mental health line in the slide. And technically, I would believe there needs to be a asterisk on that intensive care line item, given that they kind of overlap with each other in one way or another. So just keep that in mind as you're assisting either the client that directly has or living with HIV versus the members of their household. Additionally, your ability to provide supportive services can occur regardless of whether they're enrolled in STRMU, TBRA, or a facility-based housing. So you may have clients that may not want supportive services, or you may have clients that absolutely want supportive services in addition to their housing assistance. Either or is fine, either or is allowable. We want to empower clients as much as we can to ensure that they have the ownership over the decisions that they make over their lives. This is something that was reiterated in the Institute as well. So just keep that in mind as you're administering the supportive services interventions that is allowed. We'll provide more guidance on supportive services on a later date. We're working on updating our materials about supportive services, but for now, that is the information that we have at hand to share today. Can gift cards to grocery stores be considered nutritional services? That's a very good question. I will have to get back to you on that because of, again, how broad the regulation is drafted. So I will also send in that follow-up email, I will also give a response to that question as well. Thank you for posing it. Okay. The next line item that you may claim time for is the housing information services line item. This can refer to basically all the time that you're spending trying to determine what type or types of HOPWA assistance can be administered to each client. And that description that I've written out in that slide was more so based on what I remember from the HOPWA Institute. I am going to follow up with additional information about housing information services based on any clarifications that need to be made with that. So stay tuned for information about this line item. But based on the information that is in the regulation that has been conveyed on the Institute, from what I remember, this is what we have. So you can use housing information to provide counseling, provide information or referral services to locate, acquire, finance, and maintain housing. This is a line item that can be really great for getting clients into the door, especially since, as we've mentioned early on, CE is not going to necessarily be the only way you can find clients who need assistance, nor is it going to be a common way to find clients that need assistance. So just keeping that in mind. You can also provide information on fair housing guidance that educates clients on housing resources. And this could also include fair housing counseling if you're meeting the conditions outlined in the regulation, which is referenced over here in the link right here. So once you get the PDF of those slides, you will be able to read that verbatim if you would like. And we can also keep moving accordingly with housing information. Next is the permanent housing placement line item. This is the line item that helps your client establish a new residence where ongoing occupancy is expected to continue. So this is one of those line items that can be paired with multiple budgetary line items. Similarly with housing information and supportive services, you can use it for one or for multiple budgetary line items per client. There are a lot of things you can do with permanent housing placement, especially when it comes to making sure that a client is housed or stays housed. So in cases where this is an absolute requirement for occupying the unit, you are able to use PHP to pay for first and last month's rent. Those 2 months of rent specific are important because those are the only months of rent that you would be able to pay with PHP. And 2, again, this is more so to make sure that it's required in order for them to be able to occupy the unit. And again, that no other assistance is expected to be added on in addition to that. With permanent housing placement, you can also use it to pay for a utility deposit or one-time utility hookup fees. Again, this is like a one-time payment and not ongoing. You can do arrears and rent arrears when it is determined to be a barrier to establish permanent housing. So again, this is not something that can be used just recurringly no matter what. This is more so of like that this is what's going to keep our clients housed, or this is what's going to allow them to move into that unit. If I have this, let's say I have a utility arrear that needs to be paid, and this is what's keeping my client from getting housed, then you pay the utility arrear, problem solved, hopefully. You can use it to pay for application fees. You can use it to pay for credit check fees, especially if that is a requirement that has been issued for whatever reason. You can use the funding to pay for administrative fees that are charged in lieu of or in addition to a security deposit. You can use PHP to pay for rental insurance. However, that is limited to the first month of rental insurance or the initial payment period only. So please take a look at the rental insurance that you're working with or that a client is being issued, and just make sure that it's limited to either that first month or the initial payment period that allows that client to establish the residency that they need to establish. You can also use it to pay for any realtor or broker fees that come up. Now this slide has a list of ineligible expenses, and this is specifically ineligible according to information from both the Institute and from the HUD Exchange. They did a webinar on PHP earlier in the year, just for everyone's reference. You cannot use PHP for moving services and packing materials. In addition, regular recurring costs, so rent on like the second month of rent, third month of rent, second month of utilities, third month of utilities, and then a monthly insurance cost after that first month, all of that is ineligible. So there may be a point where, you know, if you got them in with that first month's rent in order to get them, you know, housed, then the next step would be to, if you had to pay second, third, or fourth month's rent, then that would be, you would have to figure out what would be the next option to pay for that. This cannot pay for standard household furnishings, so that's really just furniture. You can't pay for furniture with PHP. If you already have a rental subsidy like TBRA or SURMU or facility-based assistance, then that first or last month's rent payment will not apply in this case, because for all intents and purposes, they are receiving the rental and utility subsidy and they're still housed versus being in a situation where they are trying to get housed. And we have already talked about the fact that after the initial payments, you can't really use PHP for renter's insurance beyond that initial payment. This is a lot of information, so like I said, this will be sent out to you. We are working on updating our materials on all the line items. If you have questions, please let us know. We'll address them accordingly. Next is facility-based assistance or facility operations. This is housing assistance that can be connected to a specific facility or project, and this allows you to administer some form of project-based rental assistance. So if you have a facility that you're using to administer housing to your clients, you can use that for rental assistance. You can use that for the cost of maintaining the facility, securing the facility, operating the facility, any insurance that you have to pay on the building, utilities, the furnishings of that facility, since you're the one that's directly operating it. You can use this for equipment and supplies and other incidental costs associated with maintaining that facility, so long as it's related to housing HOPWA clients in their household. When it comes to the cost, they must be reasonable and necessary. So if you are trying to procure any specific resource and it goes beyond, let's say, $500 or $5,000, then the limit described in the slide applies. So just keep that in mind as you move forward with this line item if you are an agency that has this line item. Next. If renters, and we have a question in the chat, if renter's insurance was paid for the first year, would that be allowable as an initial payment? I believe the answer to that one is yes, because it's one payment and one payment only. That one, from what I remember discussed in the webinar, was a yes. I will double check on that though. I will double check on this though. So again, until I follow up with the questions that have come up in the chat, I want to make sure you all get the right answers. And so while I am very happy to give an initial answer to the question, I will also double check to make sure that that my initial hunch during the webinar was correct. Okay. Next is the administration line item, and this is the final expense in your budgets. Okay, so administration, that 7% requirement is regulatory. That was detailed specifically in regulation, so we don't really have any authority as grantee or project sponsor to go beyond that 7%. Grantees actually only get 3% according to regulation with the admin, so just keep that in mind. This is really just anything that is HOPWA related, but not specifically tied to any other line item that I have talked about in previous slides. So this could be used to pay for the cost associated with attending a HOPWA related training that's approved by HUD, both in person or virtual. This could be used for staff time that is associated with creating and submitting reports or claims. So this is more so like this could be used for time doing the caper. This could be used for time going on IHCDA online. It, however, cannot be used for employee bonuses or costs directly associated with other HOPWA activities. So again, if you're working on something that's specific to PHP or you're working on time that's specifically related to housing information, then please put in your staff time according to those specific line items. If it falls outside of the line items, then it will most likely be allowable under admin. Yes. So if there's any questions about anything that is outlined in the slides, please let me know. Again, there are some questions that I have to research further just to make sure I'm giving you the right answer. If sometimes I give a hunch answer based on what I've heard or what has been said in regulation. Other times I don't really have the hunch answer and I don't feel comfortable giving it to you. So once I get the correct answer or an authoritative enough answer, then I'll send that information out. Okay, so without further ado, with fiscal year 2024, all of the organizations have signed their agreements. Awards have been created and funded on IHCDA Online. In all emails related to fiscal year 2024 on late claims approval have been sent. Let me see. When it comes to reallocation awards, all of those should be completed or close to completed. So if you have any questions about reallocation, please let us know and we'll work with you. But this webinar is more specific to fiscal year 2024 and anything that is going to apply for fiscal year 2024. And so that is the way that we have structured it for now. And if we have updates, we'll let you know accordingly. Okay, so now, as I mentioned earlier in the webinar, I'd like to talk about claims. This is not the session to this is not going to be the session where we give a tutorial about IHCDA Online, and this is not the session where we're going to go into too much detail on what the claims team will look for in a submission. With that said, we plan to release a claims training video by the end of this year. So it's going to be pre-recorded and posted on our website page sometime by the end of the year, and we'll let you know when that's available for your reference to use as a tool. This will be a tool that's great for any continuing staff as well as new staff that come into your agency if they are going to be submitting claims through the system. With this said, of course, if you have questions related to a claim submission or even about IHCDA Online, we do have contact information at the end of this presentation to provide for you in which you may ask your questions. Okay. This is information that I've shared in previous emails for all of the project sponsors that do directly work with claims, but I'm going to reiterate this because it does apply again for fiscal year 2024. If you have any late claims approval, the deadline for which you may use that email as documentation is always communicated via email. So the instructions on how to use it or when you can use it by will always be communicated to you. If there are any questions about that, please let me know. We are more than happy to clarify that for you. The claims are always going to be due at the 20th of every month otherwise. So if you do not have late claims approval, you otherwise must submit your claim by the 20th of every month. If there's a weekend where, let's say, the 20th falls on a Saturday, your deadline will likely be Friday, end of business, so the Friday before. If the 20th falls on a Sunday, that most likely will also fall on that Friday. So please be cognizant of this as you're working through the timeline that you need to submit your claims. Of course, for those of you who have been around last year, we have started sending monthly reminders in fiscal year 2023 about claim submissions, and we'll be sending them again. If you have staff that needs to be on those monthly reminder emails about claims, please let us know. Otherwise, unless you can demonstrate that there are factors outside of your control or anything that's extremely major, we are not going to give extensions for the sake of giving extensions. But again, if there's something going on and it's significantly affecting your ability to submit claims, please communicate with us, because then we're able to work with you accordingly and see what we can do to help your ability to spend money once you are finally ready to submit those claims. If there's larger issues, we can see what's in our power to help with that as well. Now, again, while we do have a slide about claiming staff time, this isn't really a training on how to successfully claim or how to use IHCD online, but we're talking about claiming staff time today because when you go through that process of submitting a claim, there's going to be a little bit of a difference between what the claims team looks for when they're reviewing and approving claims versus what our compliance team will look for after your award has been closed. And so that's why we do want to specifically outline claiming staff time, just so when you're in these conversations, either with the claims team or the monitoring team, that you are best prepared to show that the amounts in your claims narrative and in your documentation match up. When you are claiming staff time for any of the line items that there are, you can we really ask that you provide the name of the corresponding staff member or staff members that are working on an activity. And for each staff member, tell us which activity was conducted, tell us the amounts of time spent on that activity, the amount incurred per activity, and the corresponding funding that is associated with the activity. So corresponding funding would be more so of like, is this TBRA, STIRMU, PHP, housing information, and et cetera. Activities conducted would be, let's say, whether you were administering rental assistance or doing calculations or administering the time it takes to help someone access supportive services or having the conversation with them about what their options are to access any supportive services that are available to them. That would be what an activity is conducted. So it seems like it's very specific, but it's just for us to be able to tell that the expenses that you're claiming are eligible under the HOPWA grant. We did include a little bullet about what is not sufficient, so I won't read that into too much detail, even though it is short. But again, just remember, like, if nothing else, we want to know what the activity is, who is spending the time doing activity, and making sure that, again, the expenses are eligible so that when either the grantee monitors the project sponsor or when HUD monitors us as the grantee, that we have the documentation to show that it's that we're attempting to ensure that the expenses are eligible. So if you would like, please review your procedures in system and make updates as needed. Just as a reminder, your agreement allows for one budget modification per year, so just be very cognizant of when you do a modification. We still have percentage requirements in fiscal year 2024 beyond just that 7%, so be mindful of that for now. We are looking through the process of what it would take to go and review the other percentage requirements that are not explicitly required under regulation. And so once we have that information ready to present for you, we will let you know accordingly. And just, if you know that you got to do a modification, a budget amendment, just send it in ASAP so then we have time to process. This is something from the claims team that they asked us to reiterate last year that we're reiterating this year for them. Claims errors are always a concern. Like, it's something that they care about because they want to make sure that the documentation that you provide makes sense and matches, and that it's not just a glaring, really obvious error. So just be conscientious in checking for accuracy and make sure you ask before you submit if there are any questions. Again, their contact information is at the end of this presentation. Okay, now we're going to talk into general requirements that HUD has when it comes to managing your grant. So we'll talk about financial management training. It's required for you to go through financial management training if you are the staff member that is submitting or approving claims. So if you have any new staff that is doing the claims, if you have recurring staff that is doing claims, just make sure that that financial management training is current. Just as a reminder, if you have been around in past RFA seasons, we always require you to show documentation that someone at the agency has completed the financial management training as part of getting funding through IHCDA. And once this presentation is over, you can look through the links to the training and the manual for your reference. Please note that if you're going to access the training on the HUD Exchange, you're going to need an account. So make sure you're signed in so that you're able to go through the modules. And I won't go into too much detail on every single slide that is here, but I will mention that VAWA is an important requirement. So just as a little background, it's been around since 1994. However, the compliance under VAWA for the HOPWA formula grants has been required since 2016. Emergency transfer provisions have been effective as of 2017, and it had been recertified in 2022 with some updates. So we've included some resources here just for your reference if you're looking for any information regarding VAWA. Just for your information as it pertains to HOPWA, VAWA really applies to tenant-based and project-based rental assistance, new construction, acquisition, rehabilitation, conversion, release, and repair of facilities. It applies to community residences, operating costs, if you have a facility. And regarding STRMU, because there are specific protections or lack of protections regarding STRMU, it's just very specific that makes it different with other line items. It just says that no individual may be denied assistance, have their assistance terminated, or be removed on the basis of or as a direct result of the fact that the individual is or has been a victim of one of the 4 types of VAWA abuse and violence. I will not read this into too many details, but they did update the definition of domestic violence. So once the slides go out, we will make sure that you have access to this language. The source from the legislation that has become law is in here if you would like to review that at a later date. And we've also included the fact that in 2022, the definition of domestic violence also includes economic and technological abuse. So once you receive the PDF of the slides, you'll be able to read through this and hopefully successfully access the links to the wording that you see here. Before I move on, I just saw a question in the chat. My apologies for missing that, Tammy. Let me read it. Is there the financial management training updated? Last year it was unavailable. The answer to that is yes. The slide in this presentation is updated to include the new training that is in there. And that link to the training is also on our IHCDA website. So feel free to take a look at both either the link as presented in the slide or the link on our webpage. As a reminder, you do need a HUD Exchange account, so make sure you log in because it is a module, and the certificate of completion is associated with your account. So just as an FYI for everyone on the call. Going back to our conversation on VAWA, this is just more so information for you when it, especially when it comes to how you may engage with PHAs, owners and managers, and more so information regarding how it's illegal for those entities to discriminate against a person because of testifying, assisting, or participating in a VAWA-related matter. It's also illegal for them to intimidate, threaten, and interfere with or retaliate against any person who exercises, assists, or encourages a person to exercise those rights. The link to the regulations on both of those things, including the right to report, is in here for your reference once the slides are distributed. And then this is more so just letting you know that in 2022, the enforcement of VAWA, excuse my ability to talk, the implementation and enforcement of VAWA should be consistent with and provide the same rights and remedies provided in the Fair Housing Act. And you can read more about this in the links below. These are the links to relevant VAWA forms, especially with that sample lease addendum that HUD has created, as well as direct links to different forms that are VAWA specific. I have, before this webinar, I did send an email to our communications team to get this on our HOPWA webpage for your reference. And these links will also still stay in the slides for you for your reference. Okay, now we've talked about this last year. We're talking about it again. Welcome to the fun or not so fun world of lead-based paint. We don't have too much to share right now in this webinar, partly because of time and partly because there are a lot more questions associated with lead-based paint regulations solely based on what it's going to mean once we hear back more on HOPWA and Inspire and the implementation pattern for that. So we did leave you guys a link for a training that we did last year on lead-based paint, just so you have some sort of frame of reference to go off of. However, once we have more information to provide on lead-based paint, especially as it applies to new updates to regulation like Inspire or HOPWA, we will let you know. Now, confidentiality. This is a requirement that I know I talked about in the beginning of this webinar, but it's something that comes up in the day-to-day operations and the day-to-day administration of services. And it definitely came up during the Institute for those of you who have attended virtually or in person. So I won't read every slide on confidentiality, but just be mindful of the fact that we don't want medical diagnoses or information of clients to be released out to the world. It is illegal based on the plethora of regulations that and laws that have been written about confidentiality that protects people's information. So we did last year talk about the importance of using a DBA when necessary. You can use your DBA when you're putting on signage on buildings and vans, on certain program documents, on leases, envelopes, letterhead, checks, invoices. In some cases, if you have a script for non-confidential lines, you may have to say your DBA as opposed to the name that is more specifically related to the provision of HIV or AIDS services. So just keep that in mind when you are administering HOPWA assistance. The next slide here that you see is more so information that came from the HOPWA Institute that I figured would be good to include. They did mention at the Institute that they would be posting the slides and sessions about confidentiality. So once that information is made available to all grantees and project sponsors across the country, there will be more in-depth information about that beyond what I've included in this presentation. But just be cognizant of limiting the number of staff with access to protected data, and just make sure that you lower the chance of accidentally disclosing information. Okay, so our next reminder is more so about duplication of benefits. So this is another thing that is important, just to make sure that clients are getting the maximum amount of assistance that they can receive under the one program that they're enrolled in. So it can happen inadvertently, and there's always a risk of it happening inadvertently. And so that's why you want to make sure that your data on HMIS or client track, excuse me, is updated, and making sure that you can identify where assistance may be duplicated. We do recommend that you have a policy in place to prevent this happening if one does not exist already. All right, now for those of you who have been around in fiscal year 2023, we have to talk about program income. So program income is essentially money or funding that comes back to the agency based on their administration of a program. Now, one thing to note for project sponsors who get funding from multiple HUD programs is that program income is inconsistent a lot of times, and what is considered program income in one program, let's say COC, may differ from what is considered program income under HOPWA. So be mindful of that when you're reporting program income, especially if you get funding from multiple sources. With regards to the HOPWA program, we require you to report in December and June, and this report has to be completed regardless of if you have program income or not. So on the form that you fill out for your program income reporting requirements, we just ask you if you have income to report or not, and you can check yes or no. If you check no, then for all intents and purposes, you're done reporting. You just need to give the completed form. If you are not, if you do have program income, excuse me, then you would list out the sources of program income and make sure that you spend that income. Program income is also reported on the annual HOPWA CAPER, which all of you may have seen. So just let us know if you have questions about program income, whether it's about the HOPWA program or about the COC or ESG programs, because I do know that we have project sponsors that get multiple funding sources, and the guidance on how to report that may vary give or take. Okay. Now, the last thing that we want to talk about is how we close out HOPWA and what that means for you as a project sponsor. So far, closeouts have largely been based on the CAPER, right? So the life cycle of the CAPER, which this was happening in 2023, and this is how we did it in 22 as well, in past years. But both the grantee and the project sponsor have to complete the CAPER. From the grantee side, our CAPER is much more systems-based, but with narrative questions. The project sponsor CAPER is much more quantitative, both with financial information and with client service outcomes. So just being aware of that is just something I want to pass along to you. Per HUD requirements, the grantee submits all capers on behalf of project sponsors. And so this is why we ask that the deadlines for that caper submission be met. So then we're all able to, the grantee have everything from everyone and then follow the instructions that HUD provides and HUD TA provides on how they would like the capers submitted. If there are corrections that are requested, then the corrections have to be completed until HUD confirms that the caper requirement has been met. So with this in mind, for fiscal year 2023, we have already done that first round. We're still awaiting on whether there needs to be a second round of corrections made for either grantee or project sponsor. So once we hear back on what they say about the submissions, we will send you, your agency, an email about what corrections are being requested and give you time to make those corrections. Okay, so with that in mind, with the fact that we do have a caper, we are going to have our own closeout requirements that you complete for us. Now, yes, we are adding a requirement, but it coincides with your caper and it coincides with the state's overall caper. So it's a part of the caper without being a part of the caper at the same time. The purpose of us imposing this requirement this year is to integrate the local and regional insights from across the state into our caper response to HUD. So just for context, as I said in the previous slide, our caper questions are much more systematic based. And while we can kind of guesstimate how issues across the country are also impacting our state, we could probably guesstimate some issues as it affects different regions. We don't want to make that assumption for you because we are not on the ground working in with the clients. And so we want to make sure that the answers that we give to HUD reviewers are intentional and accurately represent what you see in your region, what you see with your clients. And so this is the one way that we identified that, especially since we can only provide so much as a grantee without including your expertise. So more information about this will be forthcoming, but so far, this is what we have outlined for that future requirement. First, HOPWA sends over the corresponding caper documents that correspond to each agency, both grantee and project sponsor. After we get that, we will send that to you and also include the closeout worksheet that you sent to us with the questions that are in there. We will provide you instructions for completing that, including the timeline for when we need your narrative response. All questions will require at least 3 to 5 sentences. There will not be a lot of questions. Right now, I would not anticipate that being more than 5 questions total. So it may even be less than 5 questions. It just depends on what we see on the caper for next year, because from what I remember at the Institute, they did mention that the caper will be fine-tuned from year to year. And so we want to make sure that what we do ask you corresponds with what goes on the ground, what is relevant to your work, and how we can convey to HUD programmatic staff and TA providers what is going on in Indiana. So as you see on the slide, the responses will in whole or in part be used to inform that submission. And so we really ask that you submit those responses in a timely manner. If you have questions about how to comply with this requirement, or need additional accommodations to help make sure that your agency's expertise is accounted for beyond what is outlined with this requirement, please let me know and we'll work with you accordingly. Now, with all the information I've shared, I know it's overwhelming. I know I talked a lot and repeated myself, but I still included the tips to ensure award compliance from last year into this year, because a lot of the tips are still relevant. So just regardless, no matter what, when in doubt, ask IHCDA staff. This is what we're here for. We really want you to succeed. We really want you to be able to do the amazing work that you do to impact the lives of all of the people in our state that we serve. We also want to make sure you're able to continue doing that work beyond just simple compliance and simple, programmatic things that come up. So just talk to us. We really want to hear from you no matter what. We want to see what's going on, even when it's not always fun to have the tough conversations. We also want to hear when it's a great time or you're finding out that something is working out for your agency, or that you're seeing really good outcomes from a intervention that you're doing. So just talk to us. I mean, this is what we're here for. This is the contact information of all of the different parts of the agency as they work with HOPWA. So once you get that slide, you should be able to get that accordingly. I already see that there's a typo in the DV help desk email. We are IHCDA and not ICHDA. So when you get the slides from us, that typo will be corrected for. But otherwise, everything else should be accurate on here. And now we have 6 more minutes for questions. If you want to, say them, I would prefer seeing hands up or typing them out in the chat. I also want to be cognizant of time since you're all very busy and I want to respect that. So this time is yours to ask questions or to leave as you see fit. Thank you. Yes, Wes.
Okay, so when you were speaking to claiming staff time, just kind of wanted to give a concrete example and have you answer this for us. But let's pretend we have a person who works with 2 programs. One's programs funded through ICADV and the other's through HOPWA. And for a given workday, this person might do 2 hours in HOPWA and 6 hours with ICADV.
Okay.
So on the timesheet for that day, are you expecting to see 2 hours for HOPWA and 6 hours for ICADV? Or are you expecting to see those notations plus a justification of those 2 HOPWA hours, like 1 hour HQS inspection, 1 hour of client intake? Which are you expecting?
Good question. So we want to make sure that the amount that's claimed for the HOPWA grant matches the amount that is spent working on HOPWA. So if you're providing a timesheet that happens to include time that you're spending on other grants, preliminarily, I'll say that's fine so long as it's clear that within the HOPWA grant, you're only claiming for HOPWA and the timesheet shows that it's only HOPWA related. So for example, I'm just going to make numbers up just to further illustrate my example, let's say you're claiming 2 hours worth of HOPWA activities is like $500, just as an example. If this is the case, then we would want to make sure that what's written in your claims narrative as 500 is also matching the 500 written on the timesheet for HOPWA specifically. So if there's like a different amount for the other grant, let's say for any other grants, whether it's associated with IHCDA or not, I'm going to preliminary say that's fine. But again, we just want to make sure that the other amount isn't included in what you're trying to claim for, because we don't want to have the wires cross.
Okay.
And then the second question, part of your question about.
I guess I'll just paint two pictures and you tell me A or B. Timesheet A, we have 2 hours of HOPWA time for today. And that's all that we can see for today. 2 hours spent on HOPWA. Timesheet B, same person, 2 hours spent on HOPWA today, but then there's a note or a typed note, handwritten or typed, that reads 1 hour spent on an HQS inspection, 1 hour spent on a client intake. Which are you expecting of the project sponsors, A or B?
Can you repeat option A? I'm sorry.
Option A is just very nondescript. You have a timesheet, and for today, November 13th, the employee spent 2 hours on HOPWA, and that's all you see in terms of the notation.
Yeah, let me go back to the slide because I think it answers this question. And I can make this better clear later. So it would be both the corresponding funding associated with the activity and the type of activity conducted. So I believe, if I understand you correctly, that is option B.
Correct. Okay. All right. Thank you for clarifying that.
You're welcome. And if you're not at a point where you feel like your agency is doing that right now, then I would say look at your timesheets right now and then see what you can do for future timesheets so that we can better showcase either to everyone else that needs to know that this will be, that the line items and the expenses that are eligible are being claimed accordingly. We have a minute for a question or a comment or anything else before we close. So is there anything else? I do see a hand up.
It's me, Neela Farr. I think it's more of a comment. I think for option B, I'm envisioning an activity sheet that might go with the timesheet or saved separately, perhaps, like an Excel sheet with a drop-down menu of the different HOPWA activities. But my takeaway is that we are going to have to track activities, not just 2 hours in HOPWA. Right. We're going to have to break down, which is something we have not done, but we can implement. So I'm kind of with Wes, like, what do we do now?
Okay. And I do want to say why I asked the question, because historically what I've seen in monitoring some awards is just option A, what I described, like an employee 6 hours with the ICADV program, whatever it might be, and 2 hours with HOPWA for a given day. But the slide here is reading activities conducted. So I just wanted to make sure the project sponsors are clear what they've been doing and what is expected. So that was kind of the reason behind my question.
And this may be something that may be appropriate to clarify in your claims narrative if it's easier. If you are better able to implement it into your timesheet, then you can showcase that through your timesheet submission. It's we just want to know what is being done for what. So like if you're claiming time for TBRA and you're claiming through, let's say, long-term program delivery, then we would want to know how many hours you spent doing what to make that happen for the clients, if that makes sense.
Yep. Yep. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
So you're welcome. You're welcome. Okay. So we are over time. So I'm gonna go ahead and end the webinar here. If you have additional questions beyond what is in the chat or things that come up, let me know. We will send follow-up accordingly, including the follow-up responses once we hear back on those accordingly. Thank you for logging on, and I hope you have a great rest of your afternoon.